invited by the SciFi Centre to curate this panel. So to say thanks to them, and obviously thanks all for turning up as well. So AXNS Collective is a curatorial group. We're made up of art historians, designers, researchers, all with an interest in engaging the public in art, science and technology. If you want to find out more about us or work with us, we do panel discussions like this, commission artwork and things. Our website is AXNScollective.org, so that's Art Times Neuroscience, and tweet us as well at AXNS Collective, at AXNS Collective, of course. So before I hand over to our panel and our chair, Dr. Sarah Dillon, I just wanted to read my favourite Terry Pratchett quote from The Late Great, which is, "Real stupidity beats artificial intelligence every time." So with that in mind, over to you, Sarah, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Am I okay? Everyone can hear all right? The mic seems to be working nicely. Before I introduce the panel, I've been asked by the Web We Want Festival to trail what's coming after us, which is, I believe has sort of been recently slotted into the programme. So after us is Toronto-based famous new media artist Jeremy Bailey, who's performed recently in New York, Amsterdam and our own Tate Liverpool. And he will be giving apparently an augmented reality lecture on how to avoid avoiding patent. Now, if you don't know what that means, nor do I, stay afterwards and listen to his lecture, and I'm sure you will find out. Okay, so I'm just going to introduce the panel and the panellists for 5 minutes or so, and then each panellist will talk for their own 5 minutes, and then we will have discussion and plenty of time, I hope, for you guys to join in towards the end. I'm Sarah Dillon. I lecture in literature and film. I have a particular passion for science fiction, which is one of the reasons I'm here. But I also do quite a lot of work on the relationship between literature and film and science. And I'm very interested in the ways that directions of influence can flow backwards and forwards between the two. So I guess that's why I was asked to chair today. I think there's also another reason, which is when I told my dad that I was chairing this panel, he reminded me of way back when I was 4 years old and we got our first BBC cassette-driven computer. I don't know if you remember these. And you put your tape cassette in and it took about 20 minutes to load up the most basic game you could imagine. And we went back after 20 minutes, we all sat around the table and the computer brought up the first question. It was a quiz game. And I turned to my dad and I whispered the answer. And my dad was like, "Yes, you're right," which he was kind of surprised about because I was 4. But he was more surprised. He said, "Why are you whispering?" And I said, "So the computer won't hear me." So even then, at age 4, I knew where we were heading. To fast forward to a more contemporary moment, lots of you may be aware of the discussions about AI that have been going on in the press and in the media pretty much since Stephen Hawkins made his announcement to the BBC last December that, I quote, "the development of full artificial..." I can't do his voice, I should do his computer voice, shouldn't I? Which he's chosen to keep, even though he could make it more naturalistic. "The development of full artificial intelligence could spell the end of the human race." And of course, when Stephen Hawkins makes pronouncements like that, everybody starts listening. Shortly afterwards, the Future of Life Institute in the States held a conference, and they issued an open letter calling for the need for what they called key priorities that would guarantee robust artificial intelligence. And whilst that sounded rather formal, when I read through the open letter, it was put much more simply towards the end, which was our AI systems must do what we want them to do, which is basically what they were saying, that research started to need putting in place controls that would mean that what we'd created stayed within our control. And I think that gets to the heart of the current debates about AI, which is it beneficial? Or is it a catastrophic threat to the future of humanity? And I think the answer is, of course, that it's both. And I hope we can kind of unpack that paradox over the next hour. What's also very interesting when one takes a historical perspective on AI is that actually the kind of research into it's fairly recent. So if you're looking for a history of AI, you're kind of going back to literature and film and science fiction, which has imagined it from very early days, from actually as far back as Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which you might think of as the original AI text. And it's from Frankenstein that we get the idea of the Frankenstein complex, the idea that that which we create is going to grow up and rise up against us. And this has been a common theme in, and we may talk about this in AI fiction and film, throughout the centuries. 1920, Karel Čapek's play Are You Are, which some of you may be familiar with. If you're not, go and have a read of it. It's fantastic. I've not seen it performed. I don't think it's regularly on the circuit, but it would be lovely to see it performed. It stands for Russell's Universal Robots, and in it, precisely this idea of the robots are created and then they rise up and kill their masters. But what's very interesting about the end of Čapek's play is that they then start to figure out how to reproduce. And this is the kind of the second big fear about AI, is that once we create an artificial intelligence, it will then reproduce itself to produce a super intelligence, and there we'll have the singularity and humans will be no more. There are, of course, many other science fiction works related to AI, and I'm sure we will talk about some of them today. We won't be able to get through all of them. But I think it's important to note that we've got both a cultural resurgence of interest in it, the scientific community recognising that they need to start putting parameters in place, and we've got this upsurge of recent films about AI as well. In 2015 alone, we've had The Avengers, Age of Ultron, Chappie, I don't know if any of you have managed to see it, from the fantastic directors of District 9 and Elysium, and Ex Machina. So it seems that we're at a very crucial historical moment for imagining the future of AI in both science and in fiction, and there couldn't be a better time then, I don't think, for this panel. Who I am now very pleased to introduce. So on my right, if you followed the publicity for Ex Machina, you will know that during his research, Alex Garland came across a book that he says was by a guy called Murray Shanahan. So I'm actually starting at that end, sorry. The book was Embodiment and the Inner Life, and its author is here today on the end there. Professor Shanahan is Professor of Cognitive Robotics at Imperial College London, and as we've just been talking about, very busy at the moment doing the festival and public engagement circuits, talking about AI to the public. Because of Garland reading the book, he actually became Ex Machina's scientific consultant on the film. So if the science is wrong, it's all his fault. Ex Machina imagines what we will probably unpack, strong embodied AI. That's AI that has general human intelligence and which interacts corporeally with the world. We're actually a very long way scientifically from achieving this. But another of our panellists here, Khalil Solens, has had the very strange experience of imagining a technology for a film that then actually was invented by scientists between the film's production and release. I'm sure he will talk to us more about that uncanny experience. And his first feature film, Listening, is premiering at SciFi London, the wonderful science fiction film festival running at the moment. It is, however, sold out, so if you don't have tickets for this evening, you can't go, but I believe an international distribution deal is, as we speak, being negotiated, so keep an eye out for a more general release of Listening. And finally, here we go on my right, in contrast to strong AI, which is possibly still in the far future, we're already living in a world populated by specialist AI, Apple's Siri, the AI that's just been designed to self-drive cars, being just two examples. These kinds of AI are very common and often disembodied. And in this sense, I think they share a very interesting relationship with data, which we so often perceive and imagine as disembodied. You think about the cloud, this kind of, that it's stored somewhere up here. And big data in particular is the specialist topic of our third panellist, Richard Adams, an artist, musician and writer who currently works at the Royal Shakespeare Company and serves as a senior fellow at the University of Lincoln. Richard has recently described big data as the contemporary realisation of psychohistory. Anyone know where psychohistory is from? Oh, I know. Yes. The Farm Foundation, yes, Isaac Asimov's Foundation series, good. Yes, so he's described big data as the contemporary realisation of psychohistory, the fictional science in Isaac Asimov's Foundation series, which can make general predictions about the future behaviour of very large groups of people. So I'm delighted to welcome all our panellists today to address the questions raised by AI in fact and in fiction. And I will hand over first to Richard.
Hello. I also write these things down in stories, which are available on Kindle and Verve. We were asked to just create a very short, sort of 3-minute positioning statement. I'd like to just walk you through a few pictures and talk over the top of them. Firstly, is that most of the fiction that I come across, and I've come across as a science fiction fan for, well, since I was 3 or 4, I guess, has been romantic. For me, it's a very romantic view of AI. A lot of it is about building robots that look like us. And this is the dominant view if you talk to people, that they imagine a robot. And this goes right back to Chapek and even beyond to Frankenstein. The piece of writing I'm working on at the moment is called, subtitled The Modern Frankenstein, which if anyone's read Frankenstein will know that that was the modern Prometheus. And that piece of fiction is about what happens when we create artificial intelligence and by default new life, and we then turn it off. What right have we got to turn it off? But we tend to romanticize. We make them good. And they are often good, we're on data. We make them evil or conflicted. Conflicted is an interesting one, because I was watching 2001 again recently, and conflicted is the word that sprang to mind for Hal, rather than evil. And it struck me as a very political film, actually, in retrospect. The real intelligence is later on in the film, as I'll talk about. And we've even made, artificial intelligence robots into the god, the devil, and that is a wonderful evocation of the robot devil from Futurama. But in the end, my take on AI ultimately is that it will feel very alien to a large extent, unless we stop it doing that. The real artificial intelligence in 2001 for me is that monolith. I know it is a tool, described as a tool in the book, but it is a gateway to a completely alien intelligence, of which we can make no sense. We can't make sense of it in the film either. Poor old Hal is just a pawn in a political game. And this is where I like, as a positioning statement, I guess, my current interest lies in watching Person of Interest on TV, Netflix, wherever it's available, where it's police procedural drama based around the premise of a man who invented the Uber surveillance device after 9/11, and the AI invented. There's all sorts of conditions around it. It's black boxed completely, so it cannot divulge privacy, private information. But it spits out social security numbers of people, and they have no idea what this is about. So they either have to protect the person, catch the person, help the person, whatever. And through the series, as it's got better and better and progressed, and this is kind of where my thinking is on the writing I'm doing, is that they've introduced a second AI from a rival corporation. Both of them are actually, in a way, fighting. But the series cannot explain what the motivations of the AIs are. So they are very, very, very alien. Now, we will build, ultimately, AIs that can talk to us and behave in the way we want them, absolutely sure. But a huge amount of the stuff that I've come across recently, and the stuff that I've been working with predictive healthcare and things like this, has been quite alien in its nature. It just makes predictions, and it's based on, whatever, data, algorithms, etc. And I'm glad to see in something like Person of Interest that is being reflected, finally, in fiction. The AI in that series is completely alien. And it is firmly and utterly rooted in those smart systems that are currently emerging. And it's a really nice idea, because, even a nice film like Her was rooted in the idea of a person and a person. It was a rom-com in a way. And we may actually create, anthropomorphic robots for entertainment. But at the same time, we may also create, disanthropomorphic ones. As fiction people, as a fiction creator, I want to know, how do I deal with something that's so alien, I can't contextualise it in a human sense? I mean, that's a really tough challenge. So the play I'm writing at the moment is literally about AIs. I give them a human motivation, but the human motivation is just so that I can get them to talk. Their relationship with the outside world is completely fractured and broken. And and then the outside world is trying to turn them off. So if we're creating life, what right have we then to turn it off? You know, we are not gods. And I'll finish.
No, failed at the last hurdle. There we are.
We are, after all, creating new life, but not as we know it. So that's my position. Thank you.
Thank you. And can you put Hal up or something?
I'll go back to the 2000.
We have a nice graphic behind us.
Just for the photos.
There
We'll put that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a nice one.
Brilliant. And actually that's wonderful, given that we are moving on now to a film director, and we have our film background behind us. Khalil, do you want to make your contribution?
Sure. My name's Khalil Sullins. I wrote and directed a feature film sci-fi thriller called Listening. As we said, it's having its international premiere tonight, right next door at the BFI here. It's a movie about telepathy, actually, not about AI specifically, but it's about grad students who basically use currently available technology to invent mind-reading software and hardware. They think it's going to solve all their problems, but of course it does just the opposite, especially when a covert government organization gets a hold of technology and has decidedly not positive plans for the technology. It's a hard sci-fi film, so I really did my best to talk to some science advisors or doctors and friends that I knew, and to get all of the science in the film right, so that everything you see, similar to 2001, like a hard sci-fi just means versus fantasy sci-fi, and hard sci-fi, all the technology you see either actually currently exists or is still theoretically possible. And so the way, if I briefly explain it, I guess in my film, the way they invent telepathy is I sort of did some research into brain-computer interfaces and what was going on there. And I'm no scientist, by the way, so I definitely, submit to stronger opinions or people who actually know what they're talking about, so call me out if this doesn't make sense what I'm saying. But basically looked into EEG and brain-computer interfaces, what was going on there, and then into nanotechnology, and found some experiments where they created ATP-powered nanotube transistors that could basically just turn on and off and would actually embed themselves into a human cell. And I sort of thought, well, what if you created nanotube electrodes and could have hundreds of billions of these injected into your brain and attaching to every neuron in your brain, sending a signal every time a neuron fires on or off. And then maybe you have two people with all these nanotube electrodes in their brains, and they can send a one-way signal. And whatever neurons are firing in my brain, then fire in the brain of the person I'm connected to, and hence you start experiencing the same thoughts. So I thought that sort of made sense for movie logic, but there were a million reasons why it wouldn't actually work in real life. But about, a few weeks after we finished production, my brother sends me an article from MIT Technology Review, and scientists had invented exactly these nanotube electrodes. They'd injected them into the brains of lab rats, and they would have them go through identical mazes with their brains connected, and they would go through faster when their brains were connected and sharing information. So we kind of joke with our movie, by the time it comes out and it's available for you to all see, it'll be historical fiction, not sci-fi thriller. But I guess from the perspective of a filmmaker, I think it's important to think about that with science fiction, there's sort of like two dynamics going on. One, it's like actual technology, and telepathy was interesting to me for certain reasons. But also, oftentimes, sci-fi is attractive because it can serve as a metaphor and a great way to make some sort of social commentary. And for me, telepathy, why telepathy was interesting to me, I guess is relevant in terms of a discussion on AI. Because I sort of, from my background, I believe in the power of thought, and thought being a stronger reality, possibly, than the world around us. And the film sort of gets into some spiritual aspects of being able to transcend the limitations of the brain through meditation and prayer and things like this. And the film also deals with telepathy as a metaphor for social media today. You know, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, every day we're given ways to put our thoughts and feelings out there into the world faster than ever before, but it's not necessarily making us better communicators on a human level. Anyway, so with all these things going on, I guess I might contend that we aren't gods, and we aren't going... The discussion about AI and are we going to create life, and then is it ethical to turn off that life? I think we start getting into different ways of defining what life is. You know, is it the ability to experience a certain emotion, you know, love, hate, pain, suffering, whatever? Is it ability to improve itself, you know, like the singularity we talked about? And while I might believe that the singularity is possible in terms of creating machines that can improve themselves, I don't necessarily believe, I guess if you take the perspective that a human soul exists, that a rational soul exists, and that life is really a reflection of something greater, you know, like if we sort of break down life as maybe a reflection of something greater and think of the rational soul as a mirror, you know, we might have the ability to create a well-polished mirror by creating the ways we think a brain works. But without the reflection of the sunlight in that mirror, we won't have life, so to speak. So I guess that's sort of where I think AI is going. And I'm scared in terms of, you know, AI could be very destructive for the world in terms of these systems that we talked about Avengers Age of Ultron, and, you know, I really actually like, if you guys have seen Age of Ultron, when Ultron first becomes conscious and escapes into the internet, and it's sort of like, boom, it's done. He's out there. We don't know, and he could be controlling any systems. That could be weapon systems, whatever. That's a scary thing. But I'm not as scared of will we create God or an alien life or something like that, I guess. Anyway, sorry if that's a bit too long.
No, that's wonderful. Thank you. Mary.
Okay. So I hope you'll forgive me if I indulge in just a little bit of autobiography. All right. Because science fiction has played a very important role in my career and my working life, really. Because when I was a boy, I was fascinated by science fiction, in particular by Asimov's I, Robot stories. So I really, which my father, had read and passed on I, Robot to me. And I read these stories, and they have very significant impact on me as a kid. So I really started with science fiction. I really wanted to be Susan Calvin from not necessarily the Susan Calvin from the film, I have to say, but the Susan Calvin from the original I, Robot novels. And of course, it's wonderful, parenthetically, that Asimov made his engineer hero a woman, which is a very good thing. Anyway, so she was my sort of fictional hero, and I wanted to kind of grow up like Susan Calvin. So, and then fast forward just a few years, because that would have been in the kind of late 70s, and then in the 1984, William Gibson's Neuromancer came out, and I was very much into my science fiction, and there was a bit of a buzz about this new writer, William Gibson, that a few people had heard of, and he'd written some cool short stories and so on. And so I was very keen to kind of get hold of this, and I got hold of the first edition of Neuromancer when it came out, and read that. And what we tend to remember these days from Neuromancer, or the cultural impact of Neuromancer, is really all about the way he sort of imagined, well, a couple of amazing things actually. A sort of version of the internet, so the whole, as you probably know, the word cyberspace, that originates with William Gibson, and therefore this whole habit of putting cyber before anything starts really with William Gibson with that novel. And he anticipated a lot about the internet, and one of the things he anticipated remarkably, I think, was the democratization of technology. So in William Gibson, we don't see extraordinary technology in the hands of very wealthy people or big corporations or governments, but we see it in the hands of just ordinary people on the street. The fancy technology is on the street being tinkered with by, and that was a vision that you've never really seen in science fiction very much, or not very much before. And I think that's what we tend to remember William Gibson, because he's still writing now, we remember Neuromancer for in particular. But also, Neuromancer actually had a remarkably prescient take on artificial intelligence. So looking back on it now, the central plot of Neuromancer is really all about AI. And in Neuromancer, in fact, I think it's the first time that I'm aware of where any writer started using the word AI in the following kind of grammar: the AI or an AI. Nobody spoke, as far as I'm aware, of the AI before that book. I would ask maybe the scholar, he knows better than me, but I remember that striking me when I read it. Nobody talked about the AI. And it's the plot is really all about these two artificial AIs that want to kind of get it together. They are Neuromancer and Wintermute, and the plot centres around the idea that it's illegal, it's prohibited at the time to build an AI that is of human or superhuman level intelligence. And somebody has built these two AIs to try and get around this problem, and if they get it together, then they will be able to become superhuman level AIs. And looking back on that plot element of Neuromancer from 2015, that's looking just as important, I think, as some of the other aspects of Neuromancer. So then fast forward quite a few years to the current time, where, so just parenthetically again, it's made me very happy to be able to then contribute back to science fiction through my role as an advisor in Ex Machina. So that's been a wonderful thing. And now I can't give away plot elements of Ex Machina, of course. Spoilers. So let's stick with
we can check how many people have watched Ex Machina. Okay. How many people who haven't don't want it ruined? Yeah.
Okay. It only takes one, right? So we won't spoil Ex Machina. But thinking just about that element of Neuromancer, so I'm pretty sure, actually, Richard, that one of the things you had in mind when you were talking earlier on is perhaps Nick Bostrom's work on superintelligence, where they very much emphasise that you shouldn't anthropomorphise artificial intelligence, and the theme of Nick Bostrom's work and that of some other people like Eliezer Yudkowsky, where they've been sort of warning about the possibility in the distant future, well, not so distant, by the end of the 21st century, of us building human-level artificial intelligence and then possibly superhuman-level artificial intelligence. And then they talk about various ways in which that might be bad, essentially. I think, again, it just goes to show how prescient William Gibson was in Neuromancer in talking about those kinds of scenarios at a time when nobody was. They had the Turing police everybody knows about Alan Turing now. When William Gibson wrote that novel, he was a completely obscure character that only geeks and computer scientists like me had heard of, or if you were in the game community, you might have heard of him, or you might know about him because of his role in the war, of course. But he was very much a niche character. Whereas now there are major Hollywood films about Alan Turing, but it was the Turing police who were responsible for policing this whole business of not allowing superhuman level AI to come about. Okay, so then just getting back to reality now. So now I've had a very interesting experience in the last year or so interacting with the media on these kinds of issues, because it's a very live cultural issue, this issue of AI. And we had those pronouncements by Stephen Hawking and Elon Musk. And Stephen Hawking and Elon Musk, celebrity voices who issue a little soundbite like that. Now, they've been reading all of the arguments of people like Nick Bostrom, but none of the nuances of those arguments appear in their little soundbites. And then the media pick up on these soundbites and then reissue the soundbites with a picture of Terminator and some text about how, that robots are going to take over, rise of the robots, and then inevitably in the blog, in the comments afterwards, somebody comes out with I, for one, welcome our new robot overlords. So, and the cliches kind of multiply and multiply. Now, so there needs to be a little bit of a reality check there, because it's very, very important to distinguish, as Richard did earlier on, between AI technology, specialist AI technology that is as Sarah did, in fact, in her introduction, that is coming online in the relatively short term, so things like self-driving cars and so on, and the way corporations process big data. There's lots of AI technology that's going to have quite a significant impact on society and on the economy over the short term. But that is not the kind of thing that Stephen Hawking and Elon Musk and Nick Bostrom are talking about, or that we typically see in science fiction films. That kind of thing, human-level AI, we just don't know how to produce that. It's decades away, almost certainly. Maybe I think it's likely that we'll produce it by the end of this century, but it's many decades away. So there really is no need to panic right now. On the other hand, there is a good motivation, I think, for people working in the field to think very seriously about those issues, because the end of the century will come about. Plenty of people alive today will see those times. So I think those issues deserve to be taken seriously. But we have to very clearly distinguish between short-term, long-term, definitely going to happen, lots of uncertainty.
Good. I think Neuromancer is a good place to start, actually, given the festival that we're at as well, because it's a novel that locates the internet and AI together, and obviously one of the things we want to think about today is the relationship between AI and the World Wide Web. I was reading some of Murray's material in preparation for today, and I thought it was very interesting that you were talking about consciousness as created by sort of basically web-like activity. Now, I think you were talking about in the brain. But in Murray's film, when you get to see it, there's also lots of images of webs. There's not Murray's film, sorry, Carl's film. These are the amazing filming in Cambodia on lots of vines intertwined as well. So I'm curious about, and then we've talked about Age of Ultron and disappearing into the internet. And I'm curious about what role you think the web is going to play in the future of AI, or what role the AI might play in the future of the web. Do you want to start, Maria? Interrupt each other.
My background, the last few years I've been working in architecting quite a few big data systems in large corporations, and sort of on the, sort of immersed in all that. And there are clear things out there that I obviously can't talk about stuff I did because it's commercially confidential, but there's stuff out there that will be smart and that can help you make decisions and things like that. There are tools. The cars is a good example. When you think about a car, it's probably the biggest killing machine we've ever invented. The number of people who've died as a result of the car is enormous, and yet we're handing it over to robots in a couple of years. It should be a lot safer.
Well, that's the argument, isn't it? That they'll be safer. And you see that in the iRobot stories towards the end, where the AI systems are governing the balance of the economy in the world system, and there's errors, and the human beings don't understand that the errors are intentional in order to
the word
maintain the balance.
Governing is an interesting one, because that's what it is. It's a governor in an engineering sense. And the entanglement book I've written on is, is a society 100 years from now with all this in place, roboticised economy, everything, and they're giving people for jobs to do which are, I've called flow adjusters. They're just getting people to sort of have a look and see if they feel something's happening that's bad, and that's their job. And actually it's an irrelevant job, but it is a way of keeping people socially useful. And I think there's something of that coming down the line in the online space, where a lot of previous functions we have directly interacted with are taken care of.
Right.
So getting back to Ex Machina again, so this isn't a spoiler, but there's in fact, it may even be one of the trailers, but there's a moment in the film where Nathan, who's created this humanoid robot Ava, is talking to Caleb about how she's been designed and built, and he's holding this sort of blue gel globe, which is her brain. And he says that, well, this is the hardware. And then Caleb says, well, what's the software? And Nathan says, well, you guessed it, it's Blue Book. Now, in the film, Blue Book is the sort of equivalent of Google, if you like. Blue Book is the huge corporation that Nathan, he's the billionaire CEO of this enormous corporation. And that's a very, very perceptive point there, because I think it's very likely that the way we are going to achieve increasingly sophisticated artificial intelligence is not necessarily just through embodied interaction with the world, but through using the enormous resources of data that are out there on the World Wide Web. So there are a truly staggering number of sort of texts and images and videos, and they're growing at a very, very rapid rate. And if you have very sophisticated machine learning algorithms that can basically trawl all that data and find patterns in all of that data, then that is one way you can imagine achieving very sophisticated AI. So I think that's a possible role for the web in AI for the future.
And I think our realities on a personal level are very much formed by the internet. And I don't know if you guys saw, there was that study Facebook or experiment Facebook performed on its own users.
Highly unethical.
Right, exactly.
Facebook performed, yes.
Yeah, and on personal, how much of us, our emotions throughout the day are formed, by what we see on our phones and, our Twitter feeds and what our friends are doing on Facebook. And there's an enormous amount of control we're sort of giving away in that, that this giant corporation can sort of affect our realities in this way. And then, maybe performing this, basically what they did, they took down a few 100,000 users, and some of them they put only positive messages in their Facebook feed, and others they put only negative posts in their Facebook feed, to sort of see what would happen, to see if it would increase interaction, because they're trying to get you to interact with their software as much as they can. Anyways, the amount of data that these corporations are collecting, it's got to be staggering, and what you can do with it, is scary in a sense. And I guess it's comforting that panels like this are even happening, because I think the public needs to be aware. And as far as we're talking about the internet and AI in the distant future, I feel better that we're talking about these things now or something. It would be one thing to be talking about the dangers or ethics or whatever at the end of the century.
From a dramatic point of view, the thing I'm working on at the moment, trying to write, and struggling with, it also has the notion of data zombies. How many dead versions of me are out there in data, and how ugly must I look in those versions compared to how I look here, obviously. But there are dark and twisted, drunken versions of me out there on networks. Once you get some kind of emergence and ability to filter and process that stuff, will they come back to haunt me? And this notion of data zombies, I'm tossing that around because I just like the idea, but there is a very real sense, and the stuff I was doing, in health insurance was about understanding, creating a version of a person, so we could understand them. And now, how far does that go? There's a whole. We keep trying to get rid of the Terminator, but it keeps saying it'll be back. That's my best gag.
That's all downhill from that. So there's AI and its relationship with the web, and there's AI that's disembodied. But the other thing is, Age of Ultron, he doesn't go straight into the internet. There's that almost comedic sequence where he's trying to find a body, and then he keeps finding kind of broken bodies, and he's all a bit kind of drunk and staggery, and then he finds another body. So the AI, as imagined in that film, tries to embody himself. He then only goes into the internet as his form of escape, because he can't be found there. And also, in Neuromancer, it's a novel also about the flesh. It's about plugging in to what we now think of as the internet and leaving the flesh, the meat, I think it's called in Neuromancer, behind. But so many fictional imaginings of AI are much more interested in the embodied type. And I'm curious if in that sense, I think the analogy I've come up with is, I've done a lot of work on clones as well. So if you think about all the clones films, The Island or Ishigo's Never Let Me Go, always imagines the whole clone. The whole, yeah. Yeah. The whole human being is cloned, and that's then where the plot, the drama, the interest, the excitement comes from, and the tension. But actually, the real thing is that stem cells will just mean we're going to clone individual organs, and that'll be much more simple. And we're never going to need to clone entire human beings. So there's kind of disjunction between the imagining that creates good literature, film, or drama, and what actually is probably going to happen.
But that's the dramatic art.
But is in that sense then, the question is in that sense the literature, the film, the fiction, complicit in the kind of the mistaken debates that are going on about this? And is there a way in which science fiction, or can you think of some science fiction which isn't doing that, which is actually engaging with the real things? Yeah, personal interest would be one. Any others?
I mean, the motivation sometimes in creating science fiction isn't necessarily, lots of AIs we see in science fiction, it's not that the authors or creators are really trying to make a statement about AI.
Yeah.
Like Blade Runner is a great film. In the replicants in that film, I think, it's not necessarily that we're trying to make some statement with AI in that, but when you have this replicant who just wants to meet his maker and he wants more life, that's something that humans can identify with. It's a way for us to tell a human story, and we're doing it through robots, and somehow science fiction makes it easier to express some complex ideas, I guess, through metaphor. And I guess ones where it's actually about AI for itself, those are much more rare. It's more fun to tell stories about C-3PO and R2-D2.
But isn't there a way, in terms of literature, a line right back to fairy tales in this? And the fairy tales are embodiments of natural intelligence and gods and fairies and things. And is that all we're doing at the moment with a lot of these anthropomorphic robot-style intelligence? I mean, are they fairy tales?
Yeah, totally.
I think there's another sense in which we tend to see anthropomorphized AI, which is all to do with this central topic of consciousness. Is it seems to be taken for granted that an AI or a robot that has human level intelligence is going to be conscious and capable of feeling and experiencing the world. And I think this is actually a really complex and difficult question. Is it the case that human level intelligence necessarily entails consciousness? And I think it's actually a very complex question where I think the way to treat it is actually to break down consciousness into various sort of component parts, to dissect it into different psychological attributes that we just expect them all to go together in humans, but which might not arise together in an AI. So, for example, I think we can speak of we speak of being conscious of something, being aware of something. And so our awareness of the world, if you do have an embodied AI and it behaves in an intelligent way, then it might be very difficult to deny that it has awareness of the world. So you might say, well, it has a sort of consciousness, but at the same time you might not want to grant it the capacity for suffering, depending upon how it's built and how it behaves. So you can imagine robots and AIs that are very smart, that interact with the world in very sophisticated ways, that you want to grant awareness of the world, and yet that don't have the capacity for suffering, where it doesn't matter if you turn them off. And then the whole really fascinating question is, how do you tell the difference? And that's essentially the question that Ex Machina is dealing with, and many other science fiction films deal with, is how can you tell the difference between something that is genuinely conscious and capable of suffering, and therefore has rights, and something that is only faking it. And while there may be lots of incentives to build AI that is manifestly not conscious and isn't pretending to be, you can imagine scenarios where the AI, in order to fulfill maybe goals that we've given it, but to fulfill in ways that we don't expect, pretends to be very human-like, and then it's going to be very difficult to tell whether it's genuinely conscious or not. And again, that's a theme that I think, sorry for talking about Ex Machina, but that's a theme that's very much explored in Ex Machina, and I think that it's deliberately never really resolved in Ex Machina, and that's what makes it.
Star Trek tackled that in The Measure of a Man.
There's
in
lots
the episodes where Data had to be proven that he was a sentient being.
Yeah. I suppose it's a fundamental philosophical question.
It is, and it is a philosophical question, and it's unlikely we'll ever have a robot like Data, but you don't know. It may well happen. But then, is it alive? And this is what I'm struggling with the writing of it. You know, what version of me that's online is actually me? What machines are actually alive? Can we switch them on and off if they're alive, even if they're not conscious?
And then, just to dissociate further consciousness and intelligence, we certainly grant consciousness and the capacity for suffering to non-human animals. And you know, I really don't want my cat to experience hunger or pain, and yet it's nowhere near as smart as a human being. Well, my cat is infinitely more wise than most human beings, but it's not as intelligent and can't solve problems like humans can. And so there's a dissociation there as well. They're clearly quite dissociated concepts, intelligence and consciousness, I think. And yet they tend to be bound together in the science fiction films.
Can I ask you a question about one of the films on the list? Sarah said there's a list of things we could possibly talk about. One of them was Her.
Yes.
And we haven't mentioned it yet. And it's interesting because that was a very narrow version of AI, but it seems to have disappeared completely and not really caught on as
the film or the...
Yeah, well, as a cultural thing. I think the film was very good, but I don't think it's had anything like the impact of some of the other films we've talked about. And I just wondered why perhaps that wasn't.
Well, actually, that links to what I think will be my last question to the panel, and hopefully be something that opens out to the audience, which is very conscious that I'm the only woman sitting up in this stage. And one of the big issues with embodied AI imagining is that it's so often female. And this goes right back to Maria in Metropolis, comes through the sex bots in Blade Runner, through to Ex Machina, and it's there in Her. And my answer would be that Her hasn't had the impact because she's not embodied. So there's not the kind of fascination with the female robot because she's only a voice.
Yeah, it's not
there's
like
no
the
body. Yeah, so I think that would be a kind of very crude response to that. But I think it's a really important point that this is something, it's not science fiction, but Game of Thrones, we must have some Game of Thrones fans in here. Maybe we don't, maybe they've not come to a science fiction talk because it's fantasy, I don't know. But one of the things that really annoyed me about Game of Thrones is you go to such extents to imagine a different world. And the one thing you don't reimagine is patriarchy and gender relationships. And for me, that's so unimaginative. It's like you can change everything, but women still behave in a feminine way, and men are all still sex-driven, and that's kind of not even challenged. And this is what I'm kind of curious about in Ex Machina, but also that I do think that... has anyone read M. John Harrison? Yes, right, fantastic author. His Kefahuchi trilogy. If you want a writer that is imagining truly alien intelligence, read the Kefahuchi Tract novels, because I think you'd love them, and he's doing what you imagine. But also what happens in his novel is that gender just breaks down in any kind of way, because he's moved beyond the human. And it seems like if we anthropomorphise AI, we cannot help but gender it as well, because gendering is something so integral to being human. So I think there's potential for much more science fiction that is more imaginative, both about the alienness of artificial intelligence and, as a result, the non-genderedness. But I guess, as men, I'm curious about...
On the screen, there's nothing gender-driven about that.
Not at all, exactly. Yes, yeah. Although it is a bit obelisk-y. Possibly.
I've never seen anything shaped
It
like
would be a bit more interesting. A bit more curvy, it could be vagina-shaped. But yes, a question about... Any thoughts on gender before we then open out to the audience?
I think we need more women filmmakers and storytellers,
Yes.
That's sort of the short answer. As long as most people who are creating content are male, you're going to see more of the same gender roles. And yes, men are able and should be telling stories about women too, but we also need more female filmmakers, and there's just such a lack of them right now. And hopefully we do as much to change that. So, yeah.
There is a lovely moment which I won't give too much detail about because it will be a spoiler for your film, but where I was very lucky to have some secret advanced access to Carlisle's film, and at first I was like, oh, here we go again, the sexy woman, and then there's a twist and you realise that that's not exactly what's happening. So it was lovely to see that you playing with those stereotypes and then moving beyond them, which is good. Yeah. We have about 10 minutes or so for questions from the audience. Yeah, my first eye came there. Please go ahead.
Yes, there is a machine called a drone. There are lots of different kinds of drones. I'm not sure what it's actually on. Good drones, which are used in their capabilities, are very destructive capability, and they exist in many different forms.
Can you repeat the very beginning? What are you talking about?
Drones.
Drones. Okay, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Type of machine, but it can't exist on its own. It has to be directed, and its lethal charge has to be discharged by somebody who sits maybe in a container in the Nevada desert. He's a member of the American military, and he has to do it in a very intelligent way, but in a very without any empathy to what the result of his actions are. So you have a machine coupled with an intelligent but non-feeling human being who is himself instructed by, let's say, Barack Obama, the President of the United States, who once a week decides on who should be killed, where the drones should be sent. So you have a sort of coupling with of a top man, and he represents the needs of a superpower and what that superpower has to achieve in the world, with somebody who could be called a robot, a military man, who just directs then the kind of machinery which the drones are to kill. So you have not just one robot in which all these things are combined, but you have a robot which is directed, executed, and then discharged. So this is all actually happening. We're talking about a lot of filmic things, but what is actually happening is something quite robotic and quite dangerous.
So the concern is
what I'm saying is, could that be, could we have a discussion about what's real, what's actually out there, rather than what is, somewhere in the future?
I think that taps into a broader question about will humans in some way be dehumanized by their interaction with the robotic or the machine? That might be.
Well, and also, present day right now, we could put an AI into a drone. That's not like some crazy hypothetical for the future. We could set some parameters in software, in drones, and they could be making decisions over human life. And it'd be so easy for that. It's a fantastic idea. I mean, that's the plot of Captain America, the last Captain America film, and it seems fantastic, but that's something we could do today, right now, really. Yeah, that's a terrifying thought, I think.
Well, that way you can split you just take away the middleman, the person who controls the levers and stuff. But that doesn't...
The robotic cars exist. I mean, they make decisions every second of their journey. They make decisions to stop before they hit people, except that one in the news this week. It rolled...
Did a car hit someone this week?
It rolled forwards at a display and hit somebody, yeah. But, it's about the only accident we've had with them. Telling them.
But this has been there at the heart. I mean, oddly, it does come back to fiction because, Asimov, all of Asimov's stories are developed because of these rules for robots, which was an attempt to build into their programming ethics. And it's there in Asimov, and it's there in David Mitchell's Ghost Written. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that. It has an AI in it, and it is programmed with the equivalent of these laws of robotics, and then has a similar moral.
Well, if you go back to Asimov, you mentioned iRobot, of course, Calvin was a psychologist, wasn't she?
Yeah.
Rather than
Robot
an actual roboticist, if
you
like. Yeah.
We have a gentleman waiting down here. Go ahead, please.
I've got a film premiere. premiering at the Sheffield Documentary Festival next week. Now, I want to make a feature film about mass psychosis. You've got a film out, The Falling, that's just come out recently, and your film about telepathy, what you say about it. Do you agree the area of consciousness and working to prevent the corruption of consciousness as something that's very much in the air right now?
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, the ideas of consciousness, and you've talked about it some. I think we talk about the brain and we describe it as a computer oftentimes, and think of like memory and data and whatnot, and we describe the brain as a computer all the time. But that's a metaphor, and sometimes we forget that's a metaphor. And the way the brain works, and the way consciousness and life and thought and all this stuff works, is not like a computer at all. And I don't think we're anywhere near actually understanding maybe the difference between physical powers and intellectual powers. You could say we have physical senses of touch, taste, sight, smell, and feeling. And these are things we can maybe more easily program and create robots or whatever it is, AI to have these physical powers. But intellectual powers like imagination, thought, memory, comprehension, and maybe some sort of common faculty that communicates between the physical powers and intellectual powers. These are things I think we don't really understand how they work, and those intellectual powers are part of what I would term as life, I guess. What we call the human spirit or the rational soul, and yeah, the corruption of those and control of those is something we need to be aware of, I guess. But I don't think that's going to happen overnight, that we're going to create AI that's going to replicate these things, because I think we're so far from even understanding how they work in the human body, or the human being or spirit, whatever you want to say.
So, slightly orthogonal thought, but one thing that I think that's come up in a couple of the recent science fiction films is this idea of uploading consciousness, and so we see that in Transcendence and in Chappie, and it's just conceptually it's not completely silly by any means, but the way we see it done in these films is just you just cringe with embarrassment. Where these guys sitting, Johnny Depp is sitting there with this bog standard EEG thing on his head, and a rack of computers that might be in my lab is sitting behind him, and somehow it does this thing which is completely science fiction fantasy many decades away, and his consciousness is miraculously uploaded down these wires into the... Now, you can certainly discuss how that would be done for real, and that's a very interesting topic for discussion, the science that you would require to scan the brain in sufficient detail and produce a whole brain emulation, but it's not going to work with electrodes and a rack of disk drives behind, and that's for sure. And you see that both in Chappie. In Chappie, amazingly, the same kit works for the human and for the robot.
And in Chappie, they did it with PS4s, I think, right?
We've probably got time for one more question. This gentleman got his hand up first. I'm sorry, you can talk to us afterwards if you wish.
At the beginning, it's about person of interest, and in person of interest, you have two AIs, and the character Root refers to one of them as God or she. It's always she, and it's God. And the second Samaritan is actually acting as a judge of the human race. How does the panel think that any real artificial consciousness, like intelligence, might have that kind of dynamic, that potential? Because it could experience reality at a quantum level, potentially, rather than just on a coarse level. There's a old saying that modern technology is indistinguishable from magic for people 2,000 years ago. Would consciousness, artificial consciousness, be just like God to us? And the final thing, question you can answer, equal question. Have you read Roderick by John Sladek? And if not, why not?
Okay, very quickly, panel, please, if you could have a response to that.
Well, there's your totally alien, take on it, and I think person of interest is interesting particularly in seasons 3 and 4, as they're now transpiring, because they've really got to grips with the AI stories. And that notion of the thing that she thinks it's got, it's made very clear she's a psychopath. So it is, and it's made early on in season 2.
I think we're starting to geek out on person of interest.
No, but the point is she's psychopathic, so she's, in a way, for me, dramatically, the reflection of what might happen if you have this state of mind and you have this kind of knowledge. Because all that machine is doing is the same thing as the other machine is doing. It's she's interpreting it differently to those.
I think this panel is a bit like the
we'll
AI.
talk about this after, but
do you remember the computer in Superman 3 that they have to try and turn off and then it just sources all its power? I'm feeling that this panel is going to be quite difficult to turn off, but unfortunately we're going to have to. Thank you very much everybody for coming. It's been a pleasure, and thank you to our panelists. I've suddenly got very loud. Hang around if you wish for Toronto-based famous new media artist Jeremy Bailey. On stage next.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much to Dr. Sarah Dillon and Howell. My name is James Cowdrey. It's my pleasure to introduce the next session. Today, the majority of patents are granted the software, often for absurdly abstract concepts. Our mobile-centric post-PC era will soon give way to a world of augmented technology and the Internet of Things. The world's largest tech companies are now in a race to patent the world at large as software. In this world, our bodies are the interface and potentially patent infringing. Hope is not lost though. Someone has the answers you need to prosper under this new world order. Ladies and gentlemen, famous new media artist Jeremy Bailey. Thank you.
Hi guys, just a second here, just setting up. I'm almost done. Okay. Right, there we go, my eyes on. There I am. Okay, great. So thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to be here at South Bank Center.